It's been over a year since Doom 2016 ripped and teared its way onto the internet and into the hearts of many. id Software, after a large leave of absence, has managed to follow up upon the lukewarmly received Rage, and in my opinion unfairly dismissed Doom 3, with a game that has managed to not only impress series fans, but also a mainstream audience. The game received both critical and commercial success across the board, with many championing the game as a masterpiece. Amongst the vast amounts of praise that I've heard the game receive, I feel that Doom has largely managed to escape meaningful criticism, particularly in relation to the game's core combat systems. In this video, I'm going to go over id's most recent release with a fine-tooth comb, and take an in-depth look on a number of issues that I feel are inherent to the game's design, and speculate on how these problems can be improved in a sequel. Unlike many of my previous videos, this video will be focusing almost exclusively on what I perceive to be the problems with the game, and as a result, I may come across a bit harsh. I'd like to make it clear that my intention is to point out the flaws with the hope that the game can be better understood, and hopefully, it can make a better Doom game in the future. Doom 2016 was one of my favourite games of last year, and the following criticism comes largely from a place of love for the franchise. Now briefly, before I get down to the nitty-gritty, I'd like to quickly outline some of the things that I think Doom 2016 did really well. Both the visual and sound design in this game is amazing. Each enemy in the game not only holds a large amount of character, but also has a distinct silhouette that makes the creature immediately identifiable. The soundtrack beautifully complements the game, and all weapons are satisfyingly powerful. The way the game feels in the hand is buttery smooth and responsive thanks to the engineering marvel that is the current id Tech engine, and all animations have a sense of power while also respecting the player's time. The gameplay of Doom consists of a number of loops that contain the actions that the player undertakes as the game progresses. The first loop operates at a macro level and relates to how the player makes their way through the main levels. This loop contains the phases of Explore, Combat, and Restock and Upgrade. In the Explore phase, the player makes their way around the level and seeks out one of three things: secrets, combats, or consumables. In the Combat phase, players experience the Combat loop, which I'll get into in a moment, and in the Restock phase, the player is able to get the health and ammo they need to restock after combat and spend any upgrade tokens they have found during the previous phases. Despite the large amount of options that the player has at their disposal, particularly towards the end of the game, the combat loop in Doom is fairly simple. You've got high resources, which leads to playing aggressively leads to expending these resources, and playing defensively. The player generally begins fights with high amounts of health and ammo, which allows them to go on the offensive and deal lots of damage, until they take enough hits themselves and eventually run low on ammo and being forced to back off and play in a more defensive manner and hunt for glory kills until they can recover their resources and go back on the offensive. This loop, combined with an emphasis on projectile avoidance, tries to keep the player constantly in the action. The glory kill system, in particular, means that the player naturally experiences peaks and valleys of tension, with periodic lulls in the player input during the kill animations after a flurry of actions. The loop has the player experiencing a mechanical narrative multiple times over the course of a few seconds. Contrary to what you might expect, Doom's combat loop actually has fairly little in common with other FPSs, including the classic FPS games that it's actually supposed to be invoking. Even the classic Doom games played very differently to Doom 2016 at both a macro and micro level, due to the different allocation of resources and a lack of arena-based encounters. Strangely enough, the genre of games that Doom 2016 most strongly represents is that of the third-person action games, particularly those made by Platinum Games. On the surface, this might seem like a strange comparison to make, but when you compare the gameplay loops that happen in Doom with those that happen in Platinum's games, there's a strange number of similarities. If we compare Doom to Platinum's Metal Gear Rising and Bayonetta, we can see a number of shared features. Doomguy's glory kills are functionally the same as Raiden's Zandatsu maneuver, rune trials are essentially Alfheims, and the arenas that spawn gradually more difficult waves in Doom are basically the same way that verses are presented in Bayonetta, including the many optional encounters scattered throughout the levels in both games. Doom 2016 is basically a first-person character action game, rather than a traditional FPS when looked at on these terms. Generally in most FPSs, the player is expected to take some form of damage as they make their way through the levels. This is particularly the case in a lot of military shooters that use hit-scan projectiles, but was even the case in classic shooters like the Ultimate Doom. While the classic Doom games are often remembered for their projectile avoidance and circle strafing, a number of enemies did still fire hit scans, which meant that the player was almost guaranteed to take some form of damage, even if they were able to masterfully dodge the fireballs that were coming their way. In some respects, Doom 2016 improves on this, as all enemy projectiles have a travel time and are able to be dodged if the player is attentive enough. However, in practice, the player is far more likely to take damage in the new Doom because of the way that encounters are structured. With some exceptions, most of the combat in Doom takes place in enclosed arenas, which, in a way, resemble smaller Quake maps. Each encounter starts out roughly the same way. Enter a room, fight off some weak enemies such as unwilling or imps, and continue moving through the level as the difficulty continues to ramp up. The way that enemies constantly outflank and attack the player encourages constant movement, which is a style of gameplay I actually really enjoy. However, due to the need for constant backpedaling, particularly when facing strong and aggressive enemies like the Hell Knight, the game has the player often running into enemies that come up behind them. Additionally, the player is constantly being surrounded by enemies casting projectiles, and this often puts the player in a position where they're unable to effectively keep track of incoming fireballs, and therefore often get hit by these hard-hitting projectiles coming in from their flanks. Often these projectiles are thrown by enemies who have actually spawned in behind the player, not ones that are already on the map. On lower difficulties, this isn't much of an issue, but when playing on Ultra Violence or Nightmare, the player can lose most of their health by being hit by a stray fireball, or running into an imp they couldn't see. Glory kills go away to mitigate this damage, but in an ideal world, players wouldn't be taking practically unavoidable damage at all. When combat goes right, Doom can be really fun to play through, but the problem is on higher difficulties that, in my experience, most player deaths don't feel like the player's fault. 90% of my deaths on my most recent Nightmare playthrough were caused from being hit by a projectile coming in from a direction I couldn't see. I'm sure that some really good players are able to get through the game without being hit, but I feel like the situation could still be greatly improved. The practical effect of taking this damage is that, most likely, one of two playstyles end up being adopted by the player. The first potential playstyle would be for the player to continue playing the game as intended, darting in and out of combat, circle strafing, and trying to react quickly to threats. The effect of playing the game this way is that the player is likely to be able to have the most fun when everything goes right, as they're interacting with the systems in a way that was intended by the devs, and therefore had the most time put into it, but they are still having to deal with the frustration of being hit by enemies that can't accurately be tracked due to the chaos of the arena and the continually spawning enemies. The other alternative option is playing the game very safely, which I don't think is anywhere near as much fun, but yet it's still the way that the game needs to be played if you want to play an Ultra Nightmare. Essentially hanging back and playing it really safe is clearly not the way that the devs intended this game to be played, yet that's clearly the most optimal way due to the fact you can't actually track enemies all the time. The solution to this problem is somewhat difficult to come up with while maintaining the core aspects of what makes Doom 2016's combat fun and interesting. While the frantic and fast combat may be the main reason that this damage affects the player, I don't think I would want to change the way that these encounters go due to how fun these battles can be when they do go right. I feel that the two ways that I can see that you can improve upon this issue would be to increase the player's ability to have situational awareness, or to give the player more active defensive options. Implementing a motion tracker, similar to the one present in Halo Reach, with dots to indicate both the enemy position and altitude, would go a long way for helping the player keep track of where enemies are in the heat of combat. I really feel that this simple addition would prevent a lot of the inadvertent running into enemies that happens when I try and backpedal or circle strafe in this game. This not only has the added benefit of being easy to implement, but also doesn't change much about how the game plays. The potentially more difficult way to improve this would be to have the addition of an active defensive option. Going back to Metal Gear Rising, in that game, Raiden can not only recover lost health by what is essentially a glory kill, but he also has the ability to actively avoid damage via the parry system. This system allows Raiden to deflect incoming damage by attacking the enemy at the right time, which causes a fast and skillful way for the player to prevent damage while still opening them up to damage if they mess up. Implementing a system like this in Doom, perhaps via the use of new equipment or a weapon attachment, would have the potential to increase the depth of combat. However, I don't actually like this solution very much, as I see it's got a number of problems. In order for this to work, the players would need to time their parries based on visual information. If an attack comes from behind, there's no way for the player to be able to initiate a parry. This therefore leads back into the same problems that we had with the game as it stands. Additionally, when the player can actually see incoming attacks, Doomguy has enough speed and maneuverability to be able to get out of the way of projectiles, so I don't think that this solution is really warranted. Overall, I really can't come up with a better and easier solution for this problem than the implementation of Motion Tracker for the reasons I described earlier, but it would still only solve some of the issues. Another issue that I found in my playthroughs of Doom 2016 is, despite the variety of weapons available, only a small amount are actually required to be used. Once the super shotgun is fully upgraded, I find myself only alternating between using it and the rocket launcher for most of the combat encounters. When the super shotgun gets the ability to fire 2 shots before reloading, it becomes easily the best option for close to mid-range, being able to kill almost any enemy, even the tankier ones, like the Mancubus, in a few seconds. At longer ranges, the rocket launcher, particularly with the lock-on, is by far the most consistent and highest damage dealer. Using these 2 weapons, and only these 2 weapons, the vast majority of combats can be completed pretty easily. The chainsaw's one-hit kill ability suffers mostly from too good to use syndrome, and the ammo gained from a kill is inconsequential when the right runes are equipped and ammo capacity is upgraded. From about the mid-game, I always find myself with enough ammo to never really need to consider using the chainsaw, and the BFG is generally just a better one-hit kill weapon. The pistol is generally useless outside of killing unwilling in in-between areas, even with the charge attack, and the shotgun is almost completely outclassed by the super shotgun once it gets upgraded. The heavy machine gun and plasma gun generally don't do enough damage to justify being used at mid-range or long-range over the rocket launcher. However, the micro-missile attachment for the heavy machine gun does almost make it competitive. The chain gun and railgun are too situational to use in general combat, and their attachments tend to slow the player's movement down, which is almost a death sentence in some situations. The BFG is actually really useful, but can't be really used in general combat outside of as a room clear or to take out a Baron of Hell or 2. I think that there's a very easy fix to this problem, and it's simply nerfing the super shotgun. If you remove the ability for it to be fired twice in quick succession, it would go a long way to restoring the balance of the weapon arsenal. Other improvements would include replacing a lot of the more useless attachments with more effective ones. I feel the biggest issue with weapon balance in Doom is not that most of the weapons are too weak, but rather that the super shotgun is simply way too good at what it does. I don't think that the rocket launcher is too strong, however, I just think it happens to get a lot of use because it's effective in the one area the super shotgun isn't good. Another way to encourage players to swap out their various weapons would be through a combat scoring system. As it stands, Doom currently rates the player on how many combat encounters they complete, similar to the kill percentage in the older games. I feel that this rating could be adapted to rank the player's performance in each combat encounter, similar to the way that character action games do it that I mentioned earlier. Players would be ranked on style, damage, and time. Damage and time are fairly self-explanatory, but style points would be earned by the player using a variety of weapons, and the amount of consecutive kills they can get, and perhaps even the number of glory kills they can get in an encounter. Optional encounters could be still encouraged, as missing an encounter would lower the player's score for the level, similar to where that Bayonetta's optional verses work. There are some other issues that I haven't mentioned yet that don't really warrant the same level of inspection that I've given to these previous two, but there's one that I still feel needs to be addressed. While I appreciated the abundance of secrets in the levels, I think that they were generally pretty lackluster, and I think that the weapon upgrade point tied to them tends to send the player on long goose hunts, which disrupt the pacing of the game a bit. Now, I'm usually the first person to start shouting about the benefits of quiet time in a game, but I feel like the amount of time that one can spend trying to get all the upgrade points in the level can feel a bit more boring or frustrating than I'd like, and I think that it's more than the devs intended as well. I think removing the weapon upgrade point tied to all the secrets, as well as making secrets harder to find by hiding them from the map, would make optional secrets feel more optional and not required. The original Doom generally managed to encourage some secret exploration without making it feel necessary or a chore, as the only bonus the player received was inherent to the secret itself. In the early levels, Doom 2016 does a somewhat similar job to the original Dooms, hiding in more advanced weapons in early areas and secrets, and I think this works really well. The only issue with doing this throughout Doom 2016, and to be fair this is also an issue in Doom 2, is that the player tends to have all the weapons they need by the mid-game. In Doom 2016, you can't rely on health or ammo being a benefit from secrets either, as this stuff tends to get got from glory kills. The solution might then lie in a mid-game mix-up, where the player loses all their weapons and has to recollect them in a similar way that the episode transitions worked in the Ultimate Doom. A good point for this to start might be at one of the points where the player gets pulled into or out of hell, and the player can then go back and try and regain the weapons they had as they progress through. This means you can then hide weapons and secrets again and have them still be useful. The secret issue touches upon another part of the game that I feel was a bit out of place, and this is the weapon upgrade system itself. When the player unlocks an attachment for a weapon, it is first available only in a simplistic state that needs to be upgraded to unlock its full potential. As I see it, many of the weapons feel somewhat underpowered without their upgrades, but not in a way that makes the game feel interesting. While I applaud the decision to stay away from really boring upgrades, such as increasing weapon damage by say 25%, it can often feel that weapons are simply not complete until all of the upgrades are unlocked, and diminishes their usefulness. I feel like the best thing for Doom to have done would have been to have all the upgrades unlocked as soon as the attachment is acquired, as this cuts down on the downtime and needless busywork that the need for upgrades bring. This would tie in well with my previous suggestion of removing weapon upgrade points from being tied to secrets, and I don't think it would actually mess with the balance of the game if it was changed right now, as the player ends up with way too many upgrade points by the mid-game anyway. Suit upgrades suffer from the opposite problem. They're generally not very useful outside of combat apart from one or two, and feel kind of a bit tacked on. I think that it introduced the upgrade systems as a response to wanting the player to secret hunt and do exploration, but it not being really easy to encourage due to the glory kill system providing the player with everything that they need. In the original Doom, the game expected players to be self-motivated in completing percentages on the end of level screen, which for the most part worked. I think part of id's reluctance to have players be self-motivated in systems outside of combat may actually stem from the design of the levels themselves, and the change to the flow of the game that this creates. As I mentioned earlier, exploring levels in Doom tends to drag out and be a bit uninteresting. Secrets are hidden in somewhat obscure regions, but are clearly marked on the map, and outside of the early game have nothing substantial hidden within. Not only did the older Doom games manage to make secret hunting rewarding by hiding useful weapons for the early game, and after resets in the Ultimate Doom, it also managed to encourage players to find secrets by hiding health, ammo, and armor, and even whole levels behind them. The glory kill system negates any health and ammo and armor found in secrets, and the retro levels hidden as secret levels in Doom 2016 aren't the most interesting to play with the new control scheme. The thing is though, even if you remove the goodies from the levels in the original Doom, I think the secrets are much more satisfying due to the way the game levels are laid out. A secret in Doom could be as simple as being hidden behind a wall that needs to be pressed on, or as complicated as having to push multiple switches around a level and then return to the starting area to push another switch, and then have to go and find the actual secret in a different area again. Whole combat encounters and labyrinths could be gated off by secrets. Doom 2016 can't do this, as resources can't be spent making detailed and expensive areas that many players won't see. And even if they could, it would put pressure on the game engine running it. As a result, secrets tend to be simple in both what they contain and how they're found. There are no secrets that require the player to go back to the start of the level after hitting a trigger, as the player is regularly blocked off from backtracking. The general design of levels in Doom 2016 is way less maze-like than in previous entries, even Doom 3, and tends to be a number of areas laid out one after another. In the beginning of the game there are a few areas that have a bit of freedom for exploring, but these tend to peter out as the game progresses. In the last few sections, the game mostly just devolves into one arena after another, and I feel that the game begins to drag towards the end. Most of these arenas are generally the same. Spawn in a few weak enemies, then some medium ones like Hell Knights or Revenants, followed up by a couple of Mancubi, and then finally a couple of Barons of Hell to finish things up. Even the physical arenas themselves begin to feel the same. Most have a path going around the outside, one through the middle, and then a level higher up that allows the player to go over the top. Despite the full arsenal of gear that the player gets towards the end of the game, I find that the early to mid-game is the most engaging part. As the combat areas are still interesting, the player is forced to use all their tools as they haven't found the upgraded super shotgun yet, and the level design is still somewhat open. I think the major challenge that Doom had, and the reason that levels tend to be based around arenas with respawning monsters, is the fact that it's very hard for a modern game engine to render the sprawling levels filled with hundreds of AI in a 3D space. It's particularly more hard than it was back in the 90s, when most were 2.5D with sprites. Most classic shooters post-Quake seem to have adopted the arena format for this reason, including Shadow Warrior 2013, Hard Reset, and Painkiller. Because of this technical limitation, tied with the need for AAA games to be visually impressive, has led to what Doom 2016 ended up being. I don't think this is necessarily a bad thing, but I do think a bigger effort was needed to be made to differentiate the areas in the late game and mix up the variety, particularly in the order that the encounters are presented to the player. These are the major issues I've discovered in Doom 2016. I'd like to reiterate, I don't think Doom's a bad game because of these. I actually believe completely the opposite, and I think that there are just a few flaws in one of the best games of last year. I simply want to bring these issues to the forefront, as I believe that many people have overlooked them, and the game risks not being improved upon in a sequel if they're not discussed.